Hi, I'm Lynn Looney, and I have another watercolor step-by-step tutorial for you. This one's on doing a landscape wet on wet. In this, there'll be closed captions, as I'm going to try and do on all of mine, timestamps, which is down in the description. The long version is real time. The short version is this one, which is utilizing a lot of time lapse. This is the finished watercolor and the thumbnail that I've used as part of my reference. This is wet on wet, which is very different than the first one I put on. You notice that hand pointing up in the corner. Periodically you will see these little notices that slide in and slide out. Those you can click and connect. It'll take you to the long version, or it can also take you to a separate video where I went through the process of talking about how I stretched this paper. I did not do it on the stretcher bars this time. I did it on the on a backing board. I'm taping off. My image area is 11 by 14 inches. I've already done a preliminary sketch with a yellow watercolor pencil, and I highly recommend that you use watercolor pencils for your sketching and not a lead graphite pencil. This is a cheap little set that I picked up. I don't know, I think it's probably for the kids, and it does just fine for sketching in, because if I put some areas in there and I want to change it, instead of erasing or damaging my paper surface in any way, a little bit of water on this and it will bleed. The water will lift it. And so I'm using colors that if it does bleed, and it will bleed, that it's going to blend in with my color scheme. This particular piece is mostly monochromatic. It has very limited colors. A lot of times when beginners start up, they wind up using way too many colors, and their strength here, less is more, is probably going to be the catchphrase on this particular one. I picked this composition because it has a lot of white space. I did not paint the entire surface of this painting. Much of this, I would say at least 50 or 65% of this painting is pure white paper. There are the different thumbnails. I did not go to my thumbnails as an exercise to do a variety. Instead, I use my thumbnails to familiarize myself with this composition and the flow of the colors, the lights and the darks. I'm using a quick release or low stick or whatever. It's painter's tape, and I'm rough cutting it and putting it down to preserve my whites. There's a fence row that goes right up through the middle of this painting, and the highlights on it are really critical to the success of those posts. So I'm taking a moment to tape those off, as well as there's a small shed to the left. I'm working the roof line on it right now. And you can see I'm just layering miscellaneous pieces, not trying to be too exacting, just enough to preserve those whites. This composition comes from a painting I have admired at the Art Center over in Cookeville for a number of years. This is done by a past member who's long since passed away, and gifted the Art Center with it. And I told my students that the series of watercolors that I'm doing, the demos for this year, is going to concentrate on use of a lot of white paper. So we've talked about this one before. I took a brush called a mop brush. It's just a big brush, holds a lot of water, and with clear water I went around to the areas, and so I'm painting color into wet paper. That's what you call the wet on wet. The previous watercolor I did was mostly dry technique. This one's very wet. I'm floating in color. They got a little too much pigment right there, so you know, I can go back, take some of that pigment off, blot it with the paper towel, and or I can clean my brush and get a brush that's fairly free of any kind of pigment, and I can lift some of that color. Okay, you can tell up on the top of the barn with my wet on wet, I have a lot of bleeding colors running together. And so I will probably put some colors down, and then I'm going to take this to the hair dryer and dry it before I do too much more detailing work. But just like with this one, as I do with my other paintings, whether they're acrylics, watercolor, mixed media, charcoal, pencil, I try and work the whole thing up at one time. I don't spend all my time doing all the detail in one particular area. And that also brings me to a point. I may be telling you something that you heard the 180-degree opposite of, and that's fine. Part of this is to try different things and to be exposed to different things, different approaches, different techniques. You will eventually develop your own as you work. The more you do, the more you're going to find your niche. All right, this is dried. I took it and took a hair dryer to it. Now I'm pulling off the tape. I don't recommend using the tape if you're gonna start this and then put it aside for any length of time. I knew I was going to be doing this all at one sitting. If in time you leave that tape on there, and part of that adhesive will actually affect the paper. So you don't want to leave it on there forever and ever. Okay, so I'm layering colors. Now, since I took the hair dryer to this, all the previous colors that I put down are dry. And so I might be using a little wet on wet on top of it. But actually, I think probably what I'm doing more of right now is dry brush. And that particular brush that I have in my hand at this time is a Chisel. And it is great for architectural or straight line anything. You can get into a very tight area with a point, and you can lay a nice straight line. Now I've gone to a smaller round to get in there and do a little more detailing. But again, I'm not working in any one area doing too much detail at one time. I keep moving around. And now I'm concentrating on establishing my lights and my darks and defining the drawing a little bit. This is a small chisel, and I'm dry brushing some rusty color on that tin roof of the barn. And then I'm coming over to the posts with that same color and just touching them slightly. But again, I'm not going to spend too much time on the barn. Yep, there you go. So I'm skipping around. And now I'm back over to the other side. Again, with some of that same color, spreading that color. And also be aware of your shadows. This fence line is key to the composition of this piece. It leads your eye all the way back to the barn. The barn is shaped in such a way that your eye goes up that fence line, goes up and across the barn, takes that small fence line under my hand right now, brings it over to that shed, those posts that I'm working on right now, and then those shadows pull your eye out, there are a few little clumps of grass out in the middle, and then your eye comes back to this foremost fence post. And so your eye is traveling around in your painting. I don't have anything too strong to the edge that wants to shoot your eye off and out. And another reason why I'm skipping around is to allow those areas to set up a little bit, because having these nice crisp highlights and darks and shadows work on dry paper. That's a toothbrush. I'm doing a little bit of splatter at the base of those fence posts, re-emphasizing the cast shadows. And like I said, in a separate video, I will have all of the materials and supplies. I'll show the thumbnails being made, the paper being stretched, and that I just pulled it off of both videos and put it on a separate one. So the videos, I try and get straight into the painting, whether it's in time lapse like this one or in real time as in the long version. Folks, I'm just getting started on these tutorials, so if this is your first time here, please ask you to subscribe, hit that bell icon, and you'll be notified the next time I put up a video. I'm going to try and do this as consistently as I can. Your comments, I had one lady that commented through Twitter to me, and she had watched all of them, and she had some good constructive criticism. That's why I decided to pull those other elements and try and keep these a little bit shorter and have that information all contained in another video. So we'll try that and see. Let me know what you think. Give me some input. Give me some feedback. Down in the description, you will also see links to some of my other social media. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm on LinkedIn. What else? Pinterest, Twitter. Oh. Anyway, as I spoke in the first video, I have been painting for over 50 years. I am not a spring chicken. I've done lots of different things, not always in the studio. I worked in the convention industry. I did murals and fancy faux finishes for high-end clientele in the Atlanta area for a couple of decades. So each area, and then I have my Bachelor of Fine Arts in painting from the Instituto Allende down in Mexico. So I have a very varied background, but I've been painting in one way or another for a lot of years, a lot of decades. The next full-length video that I'm going to do, the next full-length tutorial, is of a painting that I was commissioned to do, and it was an acrylic. It'll be a diptych, which is 2 canvases put together with one scene painted on the 2 canvases. That's coming up. Right now, I'm taking that chisel and I'm trying to lighten a couple of areas. So I have clear water on the chisel and I'm blotting, I activate the area with clear water and then let it soak for just a moment or two, and then I blot with the paper towel. I tried that and I still didn't get the crispness that I was looking for. So at the end, I took China white and white gouache I'm going to laugh because I tell you not to do that unless it's called for. In this case, it was called for. So you can see those rough highlights on the fence posts. That's dragging a dry brush with gouache over my watercolor painting. That's how I get that effect. And the same thing on the fence posts in the back, mostly where the light hits it. And a little bit of detail on the tree because the trunk of the tree got lost in with the foliage. And you see, I am not painting every single leaf on that tree. Just a suggestion of color. Less is more. Let your eye blend it. Very loose. And instead of a whole field of tall grass, we have a few little snippets. And then to diffuse that a little bit, that's the area where I splattered with the toothbrush. And there's a little bit of red on the base of one of those fence posts, a clump, and that is to repeat the red that I used on the roof of the barn. So here are the links. Here's a nice big subscribe button and links to some of the other videos that I talked about. Thank you. Thank you for your comments.